Why do some messages work when others don't?
What are those core principles of actually creating a clear and simple message?
So the first one is beneficial and focused, salient, empathetic, and minimal. If you act upon each of these values, you're going to be better positioned to have a message that actually resonates.
Do you think that we should be working on a sort of global set of ethical values?
Why would I want to use my limited time on causes which I think are something that hurt people?
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Skins Agency podcast. Today with me is Ben Guttmann. Ben is actually someone that got me excited about his work right off the bat as I got introduced to him. Ben used to be was the co-founder and managing partner of Digital Natives Group, which is an award-winning marketing agency. He's actually worked with clients like the NFL, I Love New York, Comcast, NBC Universal, and a lot of these crazy good companies that we just hear about from afar sometimes. So, Ben just has this incredible experience that I want to talk so much about. But on top of that, once Ben sold the company, he's taught at Baruch University College. He hosts Queen Tech Night series and sits on top of multiple nonprofit boards. To just the sort of the cherry on top, though, Ben is also writing an incredible book that I'm very much looking forward to, and it's titled Simply Put: Why Clear Messages Win and How to Design Them. Ben, it's a pleasure to have you here, man, and thank you so much for joining in.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, I'll start. You've been in the ring for too long, and plus then you've been out of the ring for a while. So I'm going to bring you right back into the ring and ask you, what is branding to you? What does it mean to you?
That's funny. So yeah, I appreciate that. It's a very flattering introduction. So branding is fine. So I teach at Baruch College, you mentioned before. The first class that I have, so I teach a digital marketing class, and so the first lesson that I have is branding, because everything in marketing kind of stems from branding. And it's actually kind of simple. It's a brand isn't a logo, it isn't a jingle, it isn't a color, it isn't a package, it isn't a tagline, whatever. A brand is a promise. A brand is a promise that when I make decision X, I get result Y. That when I buy product X, I'm going to get experience Y. And all that branding is how do we develop, how do we define, and how do we then distribute that promise? And so there's the words that come behind branding, the positioning, the essence, all those things, the character. All of that is a lot more important than what we superficially think of branding, which is, hey, I have this beautiful new package and this logo and this this mascot, whatever it's going to be. All of those things represent the brand, but they're not actually the brand itself. The brand is the promise that when you choose X, you get Y.
Okay, well, I mean, you caught me by surprise on this, because 9 out of 10 I get the brand is, the feeling that you get out of a product. But you bring in the promise. What is the difference between that promise and the feeling that a product gives you?
Well, the feeling is part of that, right? So the feeling is part of the way which the promise could be a feeling, put it that way, right? The promise could be, let's say, using some of those tools, and these are all kind of inexact sciences, right? But if you look at like the brand essence, I love this definition. The brand essence is like distilling your brand down into like just a couple simple words, a couple small phrases. It is kind of what that core promise is. If you look at like Starbucks, it might be rewarding everyday moments, right? If you look at Disney, it might be like magical happiness, something like that. And so that is partially a feeling, but it's what I'm getting. When I go and I buy Disney X, it's because whatever that X is, inherent in it, there's the idea of magical happiness. Or Starbucks, I'm going to go there, I'm going to get that coffee at the end of the day, I'm going to get the little cake pop, whatever it's going to be. That's because it's going to reward the little moments that are part of our day.
Well, that's quite something, because so the emotion or the gut feeling that a person gets out of your company, oftentimes, at least to me, like the first times I started thinking and reading about this, it felt like it's something that we absolutely cannot control. Or we can try to push it somewhere, but it's out of our control. Whereas saying that it's a promise, it actually brings it within our realm of control. And it allows us to start to think about it, because a promise is something that, you even as an individual, you make it towards someone as a potential fact for the future that you're going to actually work towards, understanding that a promise may be broken outside of like crazy circumstance due to crazy circumstances, but in reality you're going to try to stay true to it. And it's what makes us as human beings, I suppose, more believable, truer to our character and toward the world. I
I think that's a great
appreciate.
point. I think that's excellent. I mean, that means that it's more empowering, right? It's not this is not something that's out in the ether. It's about, hey, what is the promise that I want to make you? And then what is how do I represent that in a name, a jingle, whatever it's going to be? Yeah, I like that a lot. Well, it's funny. Once you sell a business, some of this stuff goes into like this like memory black hole. So it's like when you told me about this, I was like, oh, what are the things I did again? So you talk about branding. There's actually, and this is something that happens a lot with anybody in a creative field, is sometimes your favorite projects are the ones that never ended up like fully launching. And so there was a project we did with like a business group here in New York that I'm here in Queens in Long Island City, and there's a part of the neighborhood that's kind of this like industrial, quote unquote no man's land, and we were brought in by like the business group that represents that area, all the companies in that area, to help kind of define that neighborhood and maybe put a name to it and begin kind of, you know, like getting a little bit of kind of community activity together. And that process was really, really fun, even though it ended up really not kind of going anywhere. Ultimately, the project never launched. But being able to, put on kind of that like investigative journalist hat, because part of the act of doing something like that is there's a lot of research, but there's also a lot of creative components to it too. And to blend them together, like I was doing research going in with like the historical society. I was going into the library, old map archives, like trying to just find like, is there any sort of like bit of truth that can be pulled out for this project? I was going around, just interviewing all the different business owners. This is almost entirely a commercial district, so there weren't really residents, but interviewing the property owners, the business owners, people who live adjacent to it. I was there walking around the neighborhood and cycling around it and taking tours behind, all these like commercial kitchens and factories and all this other weird stuff. And some of that was so damn cool to be able to do all those different things. And I was really proud of the stuff that we ended up coming up with. But ultimately, what ended up happening was COVID hit, and any sort of commercial real estate activity ended up kind of ceasing. So that ended up not really going anywhere. But I was really happy about that. And so when I look at the other stuff that we've done, we worked with Grand Central Terminal for a number of years. Same type of research experience that was really rewarding. Of taking the tour, that's like a 6-hour tour of the terminal, going and standing on the concourse and flagging people down and asking them about their day and how they're using the terminal. When did they visit? Are they tourists? Or where are they from? What else are they going to? Interviewing shop owners, interviewing commuters, sitting, once we built the website and stuff for them, sitting with users and doing testing and all these different things. That stuff is really rewarding. That's and then one other thing I'll throw. So anything that really involved like a unique type of research was probably one of my favorites. And then the other type of favorite was, you mentioned I Love New York. We worked with them in a number of capacities over the years. But one of the things that I was most proud about was they built these welcome centers all around the state. And each one of these, like 11 or 13 welcome centers, had these different digital components. They had little like maps or trivia games or personality tests. And they were all customized for each region. And they had all sorts of little animations. but being able to see when you do stuff in digital and branding too, it's rare to see your stuff out in the real world. And being able to go, drive upstate somewhere, go to one of these welcome centers and see something that I designed while sitting on my computer or working with, our clients in a conference room somewhere, seeing that in real life, that was always one of the most rewarding things.
I couldn't agree more. And like you're touching on something that I can definitely relate to. We're just working now to revitalize probably the most iconic building of the city. It's been burnt almost like 20 years ago, and nobody could do anything about it. It's a huge building, and it just needs a huge budget to come back to life. Finally, it's getting back to life, and we've been actually flagged to be the project that is pushing for that to be brought back to life. It's such an incredible feeling, man. I mean, that building was built in like the 70s, and it was one of those like crowd-funded buildings. So back in the day, like my parents gave about like 2 point some percent of their wage for a couple of years for the building to be built, right? So it's such a high level of community sort of engagement within it. It's the very centerpiece of the city, but it's just been left out there, only half of it burnt. And we're going back and we're like, we're introducing some stuff there. I still can't talk much about it, but it's just like it's the most iconic building in the city, and just us having the opportunity to like put our hands to that and like open that after it's been closed for like 20 years. It's such a huge sort of, it's a feeling I can't, nothing can replicate it, right? And I couldn't agree more. But here's the question. Here's a question, and I'll divert a bit from our sort of expected conversation, I suppose. But you mentioned about talking to people a lot in doing this research. Now, commercial organizations and companies, look, they're always running against the time, right? The CMOs, VPs of marketing, their tail is on fire at all times. How do you navigate around having the right time to build the right research, and how does that actually help that head of marketing or VP of marketing save time on the other side of things? Or like, how do we even explain that to someone who's, let's say, Series A company, right? Just gotten some funding. There is little money, not so much, very little time. Tail is on fire because money's running out, but we're still asking for, let's do some research. Let's get this brand on place. Like, how do we actually explain that?
So if you've ever built something, done construction work, been in a tech ed class, there's an old adage, which is measure twice, cut once, right? It's a lot better to do some of this research ahead of time to understand that you're building the right thing. Because today, and it's been this way for a while, anything can be built. Anything can be designed. Anything on the web can be built. Anything on a phone can be built. It's any brand can be pulled from somebody's imagination. But the idea, the hard part is to figure out what should be built. What should we invest the money in? What should we be doing? And so if you don't do it now, you cannot do it. You cannot do research, and you can just go with your gut and do something. And that sometimes works. It's great. But also it sometimes means that you have to build it twice, right? Cheap is expensive, right? All these other little adages. But on the other hand, it's really easy to get lost in the research. It's really easy to say, hey, you know what? I can't do anything until I do 1,000 surveys, until I do a focus group, until I do these other things. And I talk in the book, actually, talked about one of the most important things is to talk to your users, talk to your receivers. But you have to look at it more as kind of like a temperature check than a map. You can't look at it as like, this is telling you where to go. You have to make sure it's more so saying, is this the right thing that I'm doing? And checking in that way, instead of, getting just, as the old saying goes, like faster horses instead of a car.
So I want to quote you on this because I thought this was a really great piece. So use the research as a temperature check as opposed to a map. I think that's a great way to start, just because it's exactly that. It's a temperature check. If you're trying to build a whole map through that, you're going to get lost in the details and in translation, for that matter. But you also said, today anything can be built. The question is, what should be built? That's that's one of those. I think it was, what was it, in Jurassic Park? We were so busy to see whether or not we could that we forgot to see whether or not we should. So, or to ask, right? And
One of
so
my
my
favorite
question,
movies. Yeah.
there you go, right? Quoted right here. But so that would be my question, right? Like, the research allows us to understand a lot of things in depth. Has there been a point in your career, especially, where you had to actually take a step back and say, maybe I shouldn't actually take this client, or I shouldn't do this campaign, and you were to that point strictly because of ethical concerns, I suppose?
Absolutely, absolutely. I am probably prouder of the work that we didn't do than of most of the work that we did do. And I guess it's easy to say that because it's very easy to not do work. It's very hard to do some of the work. But when I look back, after we sold our, we ran our business for 10 years. After we sold it, I looked back and I said, okay, well, what are the things that I'm like really, proud about that we did? It's when you have kind of the metaphorical gun to your head about you got to go meet payroll, you got to go meet rent, you got to go pay the insurance bill, you got to go pay whatever. And somebody comes knocking on your door and says, hey, can you build a website for like this union busting campaign? And it's like, well, maybe we could just do it and not tell anybody. Maybe we could do it. And then we're like, no, 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 no. It doesn't matter if we need the money. It doesn't matter if we, it doesn't matter if we think we could do it quickly. It doesn't matter if he thinks, hey, you know what? It's very easy to justify it and go, oh, well, if we're taking the money from them, they're not using it for other bad purposes. Like a lot of reasoning people can get through. But I'm very proud of the half a dozen or so projects in particular that somebody comes, they send us an email, they give us a phone call, they give us a referral. That is something that would have been, morally wrong, more like morally difficult to work on, and say, hey, you know what? I'd rather make a little less money this month than this year, than spend my time working on somebody who's like a climate denier, on their stuff. Send somebody who's anti-vax, somebody who's who's a union buster, someone who's any of these things that why would I want to use my limited time and energy and resources in life on causes which I think are something that hurt people.
Oh, but how do we do it though? Like, are there any tips that we should, like, how do I make sure that I can, I have a framework set on it? Like, are there any tips that you could share? Like, how do I even align myself with a team on that? Because maybe not everyone aligns
That
on
was
what,
Yeah, that was really hard actually because my politics are one thing, and some other people's in the office, their politics are maybe a different thing. Aligning everybody is really tough. You have to. There's not like a clear rule for it. You have to figure out what is your process of decision making in your company. What is somebody not willing to do, even if they're going to get fired for it? Like where are these guidelines for people? And sometimes things were on the edge, and it would be a tough conversation with somebody about you know hey, I really need to pay my rent or my mortgage, and I need to get the money that comes in from something. And it gets easier as you go on and you have more money. Obviously, money solves a lot of problems, but that is tough. I mean, the thing about ethics is not set in stone. We didn't come with instruction manuals, right? We all just ended up here and we're trying to figure out how to live with each other and to hopefully make a better world. And I believe most people generally want most most of us to live a better life. The way in which we see that sometimes is different from one person to another. But ethics is really just about like it's more of a verb in terms of okay, well, asking yourself the question, what ought I to do? What am I supposed to do here? And having that stance, having that like question mentality, is a lot more important than having like a strict set of rules somewhere a lot of times because the overlap, the Venn diagram between like what is legal and what is ethical is not a perfect circle. There are things that are legal and not ethical. There are things that are ethical and not legal. Same thing for like social norms. Like they're different things. And so it helps to have some of those things and to like write down like kind of your core values and have that as a thing to refer to. But it's really much more about the process and having that kind of inquisitive mindset for stuff than it is anything else.
Definitely. And I think, exactly the question, what ought I to do, has nothing to do with what can I do, as in what is legal. So, so agreed on that. I think it's a good start. It's a good start for almost anything, should I do it before can I do it? And we're moving more and more in that direction. I think as you said, money solves a lot of problems. I think as we're moving towards an area where we're growing financially, generally as an economy, as a society, um, we're going more towards these questions. They're going to get more complex, I believe, as we move forward. We're seeing that happening more and more. Um, Back to your book, though, because I think these kind of questions do relate, and there's some concepts there that I wanted to touch on. But before I do so, can you just let me know, like, how did you come about the book? Again, for everyone out there, the book is called Simply Put: Why Clear Messages Win and How to Design Them. So I'd love to just like hear the story of the book. I'd love to know like how you came about it. What's in there? What do we expect?
Yeah, absolutely. So there were, and you know how it is with clients is you would have, you'd have a meeting with somebody about their new brand, their new website, the new app, the new social media campaign, and you sit with them and you ask them, well, what is, what do you do? Who's your customer? What are you selling? What is the thing you want people to do at the end of this? And how do you describe your company? How do you describe your mission? And people have a really hard time answering that question. People will work all day, every day. They'll spend years in a career at working at a job and not be able to, in, a simple sentence or two, explain kind of what they do and why it matters. And that's ultimately kind of, we realize that's why somebody's hiring a marketing agency every time. It doesn't have to, like, they want the website, the app, and all that stuff, but that's really kind of the vessel for explaining that other part, which is they have a thing that they want to tell people, that they want people to know, and they need to get it out somehow. And all the other things are just ways which they do that. And so that question, sitting there and often kind of being the outsider, really helped get us to the answer of like, what do you do? Why does it matter? What are you trying to say here? Was really, really hard for so many people. And that kind of manifested, when we saw that over and over, manifested in a question that kind of just would bug me, which is, why do some messages work when others don't? Why is it that some communication is effective, other ones aren't? And then since we sold the business, the agency about a year and a half ago, I spent a good chunk of that time trying to figure out the answer to that question. And it turns out that the answer is quite literally like simple. Like and that's where we end up with Simply Put.
Well, that's a great way. That's a great place to start, I guess. It's not an easy answer, though. It's the whole creative industry hinges on that, I think, especially on the aspect of building these messages. So, what are those core principles of actually creating a clear and simple message?
Yeah. So what I mean by simple is, there's this is how we define it in the book. Simple messages are easily perceived, understood, and acted upon. And then, okay, well, how do we get there? How do we get to a point where something is easily perceived, understood, and acted upon? It turns out there's 5 principles to this that backed up by history, by science, that all the great kind of brands leaders will use, whether they know it or not. So the first one is beneficial, then focused, salient, empathetic, and minimal. If you act upon each of these values, then you're going to be better positioned to have a message that actually resonates. And in the book, we tell about why each one of those matters, and we give some, like how-tos for, okay, well, what are some tactics that we can use, some strategies we can use to get salient, to get focused, to get minimal.
Mm. So, of course, you're going to see this coming. It's a podcast named Brand and Psychology. So I'm going to talk about one of these principles that has the closest or the most obvious connection to psychology. I want to talk about empathy, the aspect of empathy. I think one of the things that you mentioned is, how we as human beings just have these evolutionary coping mechanisms that won't allow us to ingest every message that we see out there. And obviously, one of the principles to make us, to make a message stick with us is empathy. That said, like, how can we use empathy in particular, and also like what are some of other potentially psychological aspects or factors that we can use to get a message to stick better with an audience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, empathy is I think one of the most important ones, and it actually ties directly back into what we were talking about with research, because so we define, in the book, to simplify it, we say that there's senders and receivers, right? This is and oftentimes we're both senders and receivers, but this is a book about how to be a better sender, and that could you could be sending a lot of different types of messages, but the goal is how do you get something better from here to there. And when we talk about empathy, empathy is about understanding the receiver, like deeply understanding the receiver and speaking to them in their language. And so many people don't do this. They get stuck in their own little bubbles, right? They've been in the room, they've been in the conference room, they've been in the boardroom, they've been in the research lab, whatever it is, and they know all the jargon, they know all the words that the KPIs and synergies and all these other little corporate buzzwords that people make fun of. All of these acronyms and this jargon and this internal language ends up being something that's not really empathetic to the user, to the receiver on the other end. Because, well, how do I break through from what is in my head to actually understanding the brain and the process of the receiver? And honestly, the easiest way to do this, and we just talked about it, the easiest way to do this is probably the most obvious one. It's also probably be the one that people most ignore in the book, which is testing your message. Testing your message on other people. Go out, get out of your head, get out of your room, and go grab a few other real humans, and talk to them, and say, hey, this is the thing this is my pitch. This is the thing I want to put on my website. This is the thing I want to put in the press release, whatever it's going to be. And there's a whole big industry that does this, right? There's market research, right? You can get a survey, you can get a phone call, you can get a focus group that does this. And a lot of times that's really, really valuable for a lot of big companies to do that. But we all don't need that. We can benefit a lot from just being like, hey, let me go grab my wife. Let me go grab, my buddy over a beer and be like, hey, real quick, let me see, does this make sense to you? And that tiny change, which is really kind of obvious in the front, can make the difference between sounding like you're talking to a press release or sounding like you're talking to a human.
Yeah, but to me that's kind of scary, and I'll bring a couple of things that we've discussed today. So we talked about ethics. What ought I to do? We're talking about empathy as using research, using psychological methods to get to a point where people will understand my message better, connect emotionally to what I'm trying to say better. And I want to bring in a third point, and this came from our last conversation, which, and again, I'm going to quote you again on this beautiful thing. It's so, I love these things because it's just, they bring about totally new ways of thinking about stuff. So I quote, advertising is legalized lying. Just incredible to just think about it. So we have ethics, we have a scientific method of connecting to people through our message, and we're putting this in a system which is legalized lying. Damn, aren't we paving our way to hell, man? Is this what it is?
So it's funny. So advertising is legalized lying. Not from me. It's from H.G. Wells, the great fiction writer, War of the Worlds. And so that is like one of the most common critiques of marketing, of advertising, of anybody who's in like kind of a communications and persuasion type of field. And you know what? Like it's not a bad critique. Like it is not a bad. Like there are plenty of brands, there are plenty of marketers that are going around legalized lying, that are misrepresenting the truth, that are using these tools towards negative ends. And we all see this, right? Like you scroll through your feed and you'll see like an ad for, it could be something as innocuous like a giant truck that is burning gas and destroying the planet, right? Or it could be like some authoritarian leader that is using propaganda machines. But the thing is, you can, like, the tools themselves are neutral, right? It's just about how you're using them. They can be used for a positive effect, right? You could talk about advertising and marketing as something that helps a nonprofit raise money, right? Or helps a cause gain followers, or revolutionaries change the world. All of those things are possible, but it's really what it comes down to is it's up to us how we behave, and we have to be vigilant in our pursuit of using not just marketing, but any work that we're doing in pursuit of those worthy ends. There's something interesting that I've seen. This is a bit of an aside, but there's something interesting I've seen with a lot of folks in kind of like my millennial cohort, or like my students who are Gen Z. You see it on TikTok, you see it on like Reddit or Twitter or whatever. Is a lot of folks look at their work as just like something you have to do, or like they hate it, they don't want to do work, and I don't want to by any means sound like the boomer boss that is like, oh, you got to go work all but I think what that attitude gets right is part of it, but it gets wrong another part of it. There's something about a job is one thing, work is a different thing. A job, don't love your job. Like you can love working, you can love the people you work with, you can love the mission you work on. But a job is going to, if you get hit by a bus tomorrow, they're going to replace you. Don't tie your entire identity to a job. That is 100%. That criticism of the way our work world and our economy and all these different professions, I think is very true. But work is something different. Work is what you do. It's what you wake up and you spend your energy and your effort and your talents and your skill, and that's important. Like what you're working on has to be something that you feel like is worth those incredibly finite resources. And not every single thing you're going to do is this amazing, wonderful thing. But if you're spending that, you should love to expend effort to do things, and those things should really matter. But that's separate from the job component, and I feel like sometimes they get tied together in a way which puts people into kind of this spiral.
Well, if I were to try to make this very tangible, what is a list of things that I should do today to make sure that I don't end up basically just doing legalized lying, either as a VP of marketing, either as a startup founder, or anything alike, or as a head of brand agency as I am today? Like, is that like, can we just like drop out let's say, a suggestion on, let's like try this, and this, see how far we can go?
Got it. Yeah. So 3 things that come to mind. Number one is what a lot of people call like the sunlight effect. So let's say you're faced with a dilemma, thing 1 or thing 2. Would you be okay? Let's say whatever choice you made, would you be okay if it was on the front page of the New York Times? Would you be okay if your grandmother saw it? How would you feel about that? Like just having that kind of question helps clarify stuff. Another one, the second one I'll throw out there is, asking yourself this question: what if everybody did this? Is it okay if everybody acted this way? Would we be good? Would we be worse off? Would we be better off? That also helps clarify a lot of things. And then finally, look at it from almost a utilitarian perspective. Like, will this bring about a good result? Will this be something that adds more joy to the world or more suffering to the world? Right? Are people going to be, healthier and happier, or are people going to be, more broken, miserable based off of what you're doing? Those 3 are a great way to start. And then, it's about continuing to kind of interrogate that stuff for yourself.
Great. There's one more thing I just want to put out there for anyone who would be listening later. You mentioned tools are neutral. There is actually something that's worth investigating. There was a paper, and I hope I can find it. There was a research done on whether actually tools inherit morals. It was a very interesting paper, very short paper, like probably 10, 15 pages, something like that, right? It's super short in terms of, what they were doing. But I think the idea was incredible on, is our morals tied to the product design itself? And it was mentioning, for example, speed bumps, on how they directly influence our moral decisions in driving, for example. And as a result, does that mean that the design inherits morals? And it's a very good thing to look at, especially at this time where we're using these AI tools, and especially, and also like AI bias, which is another one of those big questions, right? I'm going to try to find it. If I do, I'll drop the link in the recording, because I think it's one of those things I'd love to chat further about. But I'll move on. Yeah, sorry.
On that note, so there's a designer and an author, Mike Montero, who's he runs a shop out in San Francisco. He wrote a book called Ruined by Design. And I'm trying to find, if I can quickly, I don't think I know if I have it here, but there was a quote that I loved from his book, which is like, there's no ethical way to design a gun, right? Like there's no ethical way to design a tool that's going to kill somebody. Like actually, I'll rephrase that. There's no good design for a gun, because if the tool is designed to cause harm, then it can't be good design. There's no beautiful border wall. Like that was the description. And that was something that really kind of stuck out to me, which is, people, I remember in, 2017, 2018, whatever it was, right in the beginning of the Trump administration, they're talking about this border wall. And every now and then you see there was this desire among otherwise kind of progressive folks to say, okay, well, I'm an architect. Let me design what like a beautiful border wall would be, and it could be like carbon neutral, and it's like, no, there's no good design of something that is designed to cause pain. And it's important to remember that. Otherwise, we get distracted in the nuances of our work about kind of bringing ourselves up to the level that actually matters.
I actually haven't thought of this in a very, very long time. We just brought it up with that sort of with that research paper, and then with these, I think I need to definitely go back to this. This is something that gets me excited. I mean, obviously, right? That wall, it does hold, in my opinion, it does hold inherent moral within its existence, or the gun for that matter, right? Um, well, I don't have any comment at the moment. I need to gather my thoughts around it. Love that you brought it up. but to this point, here's like, look, we've talked about a lot of things, I think, right? Yes, there is message, and then there's ethics. I see a lot of structure around building brands. I mean, I've built a structure myself with an agency, and we use psychology and all that kind of stuff to build a brand, and we've built a process for it. What we haven't built, though, is any bit of structure around ethical questions that a company should run. I haven't seen anything like this. I think some companies do it out of just clear necessity, but I haven't seen a proper process. At least I haven't come about it. Do you think that we should be working on a sort of global set of ethical values, or at least in integrating ethical concerns within building brand strategies for companies?
I think that's a very worthy goal. I think it's something that we've been working on for about 5,000 years. And and so it's really hard. It's really hard to figure that out, right? We people a lot smarter than us, have been pondering this question since the dawn of time, and I suspect that we're never going to find the right answer to it. And that's why I think it's more about having the attitude, the stance that this is something that you question and that you consider, more so than saying like, here are the ground rules. And the ground rules help because that simplifies the decision. Like that's kind of what branding does, right? Branding simplifies decision making, right? It's a promise. When I get McDonald's, I know it's going to be a certain level of quality. It's going to be great. But it's so doing the same for your ethics, for your company, for your team, for yourself. Is probably a worthwhile activity. Saying, hey, what are the values that are important to us? We're not gonna wake up every day and do like the Pledge of Allegiance to the values of our company, but it's important that when you are faced with that quadrant, you can look back sometimes and say, hey, this doesn't align with who we are and what we want to do, because again, it's very tempting in that moment, especially when you're a small business, if you're a freelancer, when you got to make the quarterly earnings, whatever it's going to be, to say, well, okay, but maybe this time. And that's a very slippery slope.
It's interesting tying ethics to the values. I mean, they are in, tied for sure, but most companies will have their values set out because it helps them to, to hire more people. But again, it feels a little, too much business oriented. I want to keep, people for longer periods of time. I build a set of values, and we can agree on those values. But it's
There's
also
a
the ethics. Yeah. Sorry.
there's a Marcus Aurelius quote, which I'll butcher. I'll just paraphrase it, which is, "You should do the right thing because it's the right thing to do." Like, we shouldn't need all these other things. But the way I like to frame it too is, even if for some reason you still need something else, it is better for recruitment. It is better for your marketing. It is better for your legal bills. All these other things, to be ethical, to work on on things that are net positive rather than net negative.
100%. And Ben, I think we actually went full circle when you went back to the promise. So that was a very good way to sort of close this conversation. But I do have a final question, and that's just like, could you share with us some good channels, podcasts, websites that it's worth visiting for anyone who's like a VP of marketing or a brand leader or anything like that? And also, when is the book coming out, and where can we get it?
Absolutely. So the book is coming out, I believe, October 10th. If you go to my website, just benguttmann.com, two T's, two N's, you'll see the link to it there. You'll see also, I send out a very short email once a week. That's just an article and a link and an idea. You can check that out. And I'm really excited for that. It's going to be a blast. I'm almost done with the book right now. I have the last round of like page proofs I have to review in the next couple of days. So beyond that, one thing I recommend to everybody, especially in roles like what you and I do, is there's plenty of stuff. There's plenty. You can go get Marketing Brew. You can go read Ad Age. All that stuff is great. Spend time looking well outside our industry at other things. If it's fiction, if it's art, if it's poetry, if it's music, whatever it is, that's very important, because that like feeds the creative juice, the creative like factory that helps connect, a brand and culture. And also just the ideas that you get from other stuff. If you're reading the same things that everybody else is reading, if you're watching the same thing everybody else is watching, you think the same way everybody else is. But being able to bring other stuff in is always really nice. On that note, I would say, let's say a couple podcasts that I've really enjoyed is, there's a new one called If Books Could Kill, which it actually is a really, I don't know if you've seen that yet. It just came out a few weeks ago. These two hosts, they basically do like a entertaining teardown of a lot of like very popular books, sometimes like sociological, sometimes business, sometimes self-help. And it's interesting to see that kind of critical lens on the things that we probably saw on the bestsellers list for like, for weeks, months, and years. And then there's a podcast called People I Mostly Admire, by Stephen Levitt, who's one of the Freakonomics folks. And he is interesting because he's an academic, he's an economist, and he's interviewing a lot of other like really smart people. And it's a very like kind and thoughtful conversation usually. And I always end up learning something from that, and especially when it's somebody who I have no idea who they were before. Some mathematician comes on, and I'm like, wow, I had no idea. And so both of those I think are really top of mind as fun things.
Ben, thank you so much for sharing everything today. And I really appreciated this conversation. I hope we get to have another one soon, probably offline and in New York.
Likewise, this is an absolute blast. I really enjoyed chatting, and yeah, looking forward to catching up soon.
All right. For everyone out there, please hit subscribe, and let's keep in touch through all the social media channels.